Hello and welcome once again to the How Long to Beat podcast. As always, you are listening to me, Rick, as well as my esteemed colleagues Paula.
Hello.
And Alex.
Hey.
And today, as always, we're going to start talking about some games that we've beaten, by which I mean me and Alex have beaten. We've retired, by which I mean me and Alex have retired. And we've all been playing some games, which is the main thing. And we've also all got a topical topic. Some of you might have seen some bits and bobs of news over the previous week concerning the term JRPG and the connotations therein. We're going to talk about that this week, and then we'll finish off on a brighter note with How Long to Beat the Game. Gets worse every time.
Well, yeah. Usually you give a little bit of like with everyone's favorite thing, but you just went right into it this time.
Listen, if I'm not going to get to bait you, I'm going to go the other way around, and you can both look very, very foolish.
Well, I don't know if we look foolish. I think we all do. But that should be the name of our podcast.
Do we count EPUBs as game completions? Alex, discuss.
Yeah, I like to, I read the Boss Fight books series. I was relaxing on a beach this week, which was super nice. We went down to Mexico for the week, despite a little snafu trying to get back, but that's just flying these days. But I like to read books on the beach. And of course, if I can't play video games on the beach, I will read books about video games on the beach. So I was reading the Resident Evil one. It's one of the later ones in the series, and it's actually written by Philip J. Reed, who very unfortunately died by suicide just a year or so ago. Actually, I think a year ago, yeah. And the book itself actually does talk a little bit about that in it. I'm not obviously can predict that sort of thing, but reading it definitely, when you know that, it does kind of change the reading of it a little bit. But it's really well done. Like, it's one of those. So like Boss Fight books, they really there's a number of different tacks that writers take on these, right? Because like each one, there's not like one specific like this is what Boss Fight books are. There's some that are more like straight documentaries about like the creation of the game, which like the Knights of the Old Republic one, which is a bit shorter, is really kind of like that. It's like, here is how the game was made, et cetera, et cetera. Then there are some that are kind of like a little more interviewee-ish around like some of the people who made the game, but like maybe the larger world around and like the context around it, which can be like NBA Jam as well. And also things like Bible Adventures, which is really much like this sort of like investigation of, the game, the milieu, the people who made it, but then also this like a personal aspect to it. And then there are some that are really like these sort of personal deconstructions of the games. And this one I think really falls into that area. Like, it's very much this sort of personal deconstruction of the game, but also some of the more like nuanced or like kind of niche aspects of the game itself. Like, he manages to track down most of the actors from the like live action segments of Resident Evil, which I think is really cool because he has these really fun conversations with them, and you get an eye into like how Japanese kind of not just game development, but like video creation was happening in the 90s, like what that looked like. And it's a really fascinating kind of peer into that world. As well as like, there is some sort of discussion of, and like he does dig deep into the mechanics of the game as well. And he kind of like structures it as if you're playing through the game, right? Like he'll go through it kind of slowly throughout. And so I think it's one of the stronger Boss Fight books that I've read thus far. And again, this is coming like later in the series of these books as well, when there's like a lot more that you can look back on, I think, and that helps as well. Like, people can kind of see like what have other people done, and like I think you can get a kind of a vibe for that. And also he like talks to there was like a really fun segment where he talks to like psychologists who really study the concept of fear and whatnot, and like really digs into like what is it about fear that actually makes us like that we like, and like what is it why do we like sort of frightening games or movies so much, and has like a really interesting conversation about the idea that like games and film are so excellent. Okay, the psychologist talked about how like fear, to actually be afraid is not a good experience, right? Because you enter into the fight, flight, run sort of thing. But fear is actually extremely close to the feeling of excitement. And what changes excitement is the feeling of comfort, right? Of safety. And so she talks about like this idea of like set and setting, and the idea, which is like a thing that's in a lot of different kind of stuff. But like the concept of when you sit down to go play a game that's frightening or a movie that's frightening, you're actually prepared to be scared, right? You sit yourself down and you have control over finishing the experience and stopping the experience. Actual fear is horrible. It is not a good experience. It's terrifying, right? And it makes you run away, and you never know when to expect it, but you can expect it within a game. And so it actually, and like she mentions how like at times, and like they've noticed in the psychology, is that if you can like turn to look at someone who maybe is laughing at the horrifying thing or is enjoying it as well, it can literally just flip a switch in your brain to turn the concept, the feeling of fear, and it just nudges it into excitement and into this really fun, exhilarating feeling. And so I thought that was a really cool, because like sometimes we talk about it, it's like, oh, I just like horror games, but it's like fun to get someone who's like literally just studying like, what is this actually physiologically doing to you in your like to your body, and like how can you get more experiences like this? And it's really neat that like they mentioned how like literally a communal experience of fear is actually more enjoyable than a singular one, because you actually have more opportunities to enjoy the game even more. But anyway, and then like there was discussion too of like children, right? Your prefrontal cortex like is so underdeveloped when you're a child that it's extremely difficult for like a child's brain to distinguish fake from real, and especially images, right? Images for a child, even if it is concretely fake, the way that a child's brain simply perceives the world, it doesn't matter. It imprints itself, and it can be extremely horrifying. And you can still have really fond memories later on in life, right? But it was really neat to talk about how it's like, yeah, as a kid playing one of these games might actually be significantly more terrifying than when you're an adult, right? Because as an adult, you just literally have the ability to recognize it's fake. And the ability to do that later on, right? And that's the big difference. Even a child who maybe knows something is fake in the moment, your brain can still process later that image again and show it to you as if it's a very real thing. So anyway, I thought that was really cool, like conversation and discussion on that kind of stuff. And I really recommend this one for fans of horror and for fans of Resident Evil in general, because I think it's a really cool take, and it's not something that I think you can find in a video essay anywhere, right? Like I know sometimes it's like, oh, well, again, with these boss fight books, what I think I'm enjoying about them is that they're like independently researched books, right? So a lot of, not to knock any of the, I love video essays so much, but as we know, a lot of them can often become a repetition of information, right? Like this is all the stuff that you can find on the internet. So here you go. But like a lot of these books, and this one in particular, delves a little more into like the lost media aspects of it, like finding those, those like actors and whatnot. And even actually he has like a big section talking to the voice actors and to the guy who does the Resident Evil. Like he found that guy and like was talking to him. He's like this huge voice actor in the world in general. Like he's done so much stuff, but he was paid like literally the day he did it. Capcom was like, can you do 1 to 10, please? Like that. And of course he had to do Biohazard, right? Like he does that first, and then he was doing the Resident Evil, and he had to do like 10 of those, and they wanted him to scream it into the mic, which was horrible on his voice and also horrible for the recording in general. So he's just like, yeah, I got paid okay to do all of those, and he's like, really wish I could get a few royalties on those. But I don't even think they've been using them as much lately. So I can't remember if Resident Evil Village had it. I think it did, but I can't remember. Anyway, oh, and one other fun thing. The actors in it didn't know they were in Resident Evil because it was called Biohazard. That's what it's called in Japan. So they had no idea.
And if you're not a gamer, yeah.
Until about 2014, 2016, all the actors had no idea they were a part of Resident Evil history. They had no concept whatsoever. They were like, oh yeah, I did this thing on Biohazard. And they only learned like a few decades later that, by the way, you're like big for a lot of people's childhoods. And they were like, what the fuck? They just have this moment of like, that's so cool. Because they're like, yeah, I just did this thing called Biohazard. I don't know what it is, right? Like they knew what Resident Evil was, but not that they were a part of it. So I thought that was
remarkable, really. Yeah.
Yeah, super remarkable. So yeah, anyway, really, really cool book. I super recommend it. I think a lot of people might even have it because I know there was a big humble bundle of these books. The digital copies of them, at least. I've got the hard copies, which is nice, although I'm slowly moving to digital because shipping can get expensive for them. But anyway, that's that. Boss fight books. The other one that I beat is Pokemon Scarlet. I beat it. It's over. it's over. um, eh, I don't know how. I think I've gotten most of my like feelings of this one. Yeah, I know you were like, huh. I've got most of my feelings on this one out already. Um, the positives, like the three different paths, they kind of wind into this one sort of final one. The final one is pretty fucking stupid and not very good. It's actually not even, it's really fucking stupid. Like it goes really left field to the point where you're like, robots? AI? What is going on? But that's fine. Again, game for 10-year-olds. I don't really care. Some of them probably think it's super dope. That's fine. I
Hello.
Hello. Yeah, you like it? Cool. Sure. You know what the problem is? I think the idea might have worked maybe in Violet, because I guess Violet probably talks about future stuff. Because like anyway, Scarlet is all about past. I'm sure Violet is all about future. So I think they maybe have had some issues narrative wise in combining those two concepts and then trying to make it so that it works for both of them. Because I'm sure they didn't want to have to redo a lot of shit. They probably just wanted it to be similar.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. So anyway, the concepts in this one, the idea of having three main quests that when you finish resolve into one larger one, that's a cool idea. It's fine. They don't do a lot with it, to be honest. And it starts to feel a little drawn out. The finale, like the kind of post-game stuff, is kind of cool. There's like this tournament thing you do that's pretty fun. And you can kind of repeat it, which is kind of neat, I guess. But I'll be honest, Pokemon does sort of turn into, and this is kind of what has always been the issue with Pokemon. And to be honest, with a lot of games of this ilk, like a lot of these sort of turn-based games, where I think of Dragon Quest XI actually, a lot of this, where like it's super good, but then at the end of the game, it just turns into a fight gauntlet, right? Where it's like, okay, well now you're just going to go fight a bunch of stuff, and this stuff's going to be harder. So just keep fighting harder stuff, even though realistically, you just have your one party and your party's leveling up. So it's not actually that much harder. You're just fighting maybe slightly more interesting combinations. But my team just was fucking wiping through everything so easily at this point, right? And I suppose if you're a child, that's when it gets harder. I think of my time with the Elite Four, it was quite a challenge. So I don't know. Pokemon is so difficult to categorize at this point because, like, yeah, part of me always, as I play these games, tries to keep in mind that they're trying to hit a demographic of very young to much older, right? Like, they're really trying to hit the gamut. And largely, I don't think they succeed. I think they do partially. Here's what it is. By trying to be so general, they become bland, right? And I think that's been an issue in most games, but I don't think that was as much of an issue in the first one, is the thing. Like, it felt like it had personality and was challenging, and then it just got blander as time went on, right? Because I wasn't even that young when, like, Gold and Silver came out, and Crystal and whatnot, and I remember it was challenging and I had a good time with it. And I don't know, I feel like this one has some slightly challenging elements, but they make you fight like the same people over and over again, to the point where it's like, okay, maybe this is just because you're having a hard time figuring out like Pokemon combinations, but like, do I really have to fight that dude again? Like freaking, what's his face, Arvin or whatever. Maybe he's different in the other ones, but like, he's not like your rival. He's like a pal that you do one of the quests with. I fought that dude so many times that I'm like, I think I'm good. And for some reason, the normal type gym leader is one of the Elite Four. And I was like, really? That dude's part of the Elite Four? This time he has flying Pokemon. Oh, wow. Right? Like, he was the easiest of the Elite Four by a wide margin. So yeah, I just, it was fun. I had an okay time. I was certainly done with it by the end. I did not feel like doing anything more. It's a lot better than Pokemon Sword and Shield. Like, a lot better than that one. I'm sure, Paula, you agree.
I wholeheartedly. Oh my god, I agree.
Yeah,
I'm gonna. Those words are very hard. Sorry.
No, wholeheartedly.
No,
That is
don't
a
be.
hard one to do.
wholeheartedly agree. Yeah. Sorry.
Well, it's
I
'cause-
wanted to be fancy for just once. I might have like sorry. I wanted to be cool, use fancy words, and it just backfired on me like real bad.
That's okay.
And why are you so laughing so hard?
It's just
Sorry for not being an English
No.
speaker.
it's none of that. It's just it's very endearing.
It's the wholesomeness of it. You're like, oh, it's just trying.
I just wanted to be fancy. Don't worry, we're not making fun of you. It's just very wholesome. Okay, so what was I gonna say? Oh yeah. Anyway, yeah, I'm in efforts of not trying to spoil things. Like obviously, I'm not playing this game with like the co-op stuff in mind, so I'm sure the raids and things are fun. I didn't do any of those. You don't have to do any of them. I just basically ignored them all. I'm certain for a segment of players, those are fun, and nothing against having those in the game. I think it's cool to have more ways for people to play with each other. That sounded odd, but anyway, like I just at the end of the day, as I go through this, the more I play the game, the more you get the feeling of like, right, this is like a giant corporate thing, right? That has touches of artistry in it, and touches of very interesting game design, and like touches of like what feels like the artists, the developers really trying to kind of put forward a vision for Pokemon, that at times really flounders. And it's almost an exercise in like, because like realistically, there have been no Pokemon clones, right? Nothing has come close. There are some out there, there's like Temtem and these things, but they don't come Nexamon or whatever. They're not even fucking near this shit, right? Like they don't even almost hit on it, because it actually does take a mountain of developers to make these things well. I think what is a shame is that Pokemon to me is a bit of a testament of capitalist greed, where it's really like everyone wants a pie, wants like a bit of the pie of it, and what it's ended up doing is that it funnels this like horrifying machine of just like excess and like consumption and just like pushing out product, and then they barely fuel or funnel any of it back into the game development itself, which to me is absurd, right? It's like you have the most successful thing on the planet and you don't push more into making the best product possible through that. And yeah, there's like this, because anyway, this is kind of besides the point, but like to me, what's nuts is like, because I hear some people say like, oh, well, they need new Pokemon all the time. And I'm like, no, but just like you could literally create multiple teams in multiple freaking development studios who are developing side games like Pokemon Legends Arceus or whatever that get published every other year or so and still maintain a schedule of Pokemon games, and you would be fine, right? But it's just absurd to me how much they try to push out on these. They have such a backlog. Anyway, I'll get into the weeds on this, but overall, do I recommend it? Like, yeah, I actually think even for non-Pokemon fans, I think if you were to try a Pokemon game and wanted to have a good time, I think this is quite a safe bet to jump into. Like, technical issues aside, which again, now that I'm playing Fire Emblem, wow, Pokemon is fucking ugly. Like, even with that being said, it is a very fun game, right? And that I think does do a lot of heavy lifting, even if the game is not perfect. It is very fun. It's probably in an 8 area for me right now. And that's literally just because of technical issues. Like, it would probably be pushed up to a 9 if those technical issues were kind of ironed out a little bit. But in terms of full enjoyment, that's where it's at. It's just, there are high expectations for a game like this. And so the reality is that factors into the experience and the enjoyment of it, right? But if I were a brand new player, if I were a brand new kid coming into this, I probably would be like, I would lose my mind with this thing. It would blow my mind entirely. Like, it's certainly something that, like, if I were a child now, I'd be like, whoa, like, it's pretty wild. Especially getting to see all of them. And they did actually realize their dream of like an open world Pokemon game. Even if their open world is pathetic. Plus, you gotta love hey, you beat the game. You want to go fight all the gyms again? What? It's like, that's like the post game. It's just like, go fight them all again. And now they're a little bit stronger, but not really, because your team is much stronger now too. So they actually you just one shot the gym leaders more effectively now.
Still, I have to say that in a little bit of characterization that they did for the team leader, that she said, hey, so usually kids come here first because it is really close to the to
Yeah.
Mesagosa, which is the capital. So they tell me that I have to use like quicker programming for this. But now, since you are, I was supposed to be waiting for the champion. Well, now I brought my agent with
Still a
still
bunch of
back
fucking
types.
pushovers, but
Yeah, but still back types are usually like the worst type in the game in the sense of they are shit defending and they are shit attacking. So sorry, not much to do there.
yeah, because it's so funny.
Uh,
Like, she brings out her A team, and I still one shotted that A team so fast. I was like, yeah, great A team.
it was kind of sad though. But still, like even that little bit of world building, like there's so little of it that when it shows up, it's like, yeah, nice, finally an explanation for this.
Yeah, and
So
that's
I'm grasping that straws right now. I
yes.
feel like.
And again, I thought that too. Like, and I actually think the gym leaders' personalities were well developed in this one. Some of them are a little corny, and they're like a little bit too one note. But like the beauty lady, she's just a nothingness. She's just about beauty, I guess. You're like, all right, whatever. The snowboarder was cool. The water guy had the craziest look, but I enjoyed it. There's a lot of like good stuff, and then there's one who's like Iona. I think it's Iona, because I think it's supposed to be
I
like,
don't know.
because she
Yeah.
says I don't know all the time. I don't know. I don't know. So I think that's what her name's supposed to be. But anyway, she's like a streamer, and I actually thought they did a good job at that. It wasn't like, just like making fun of stream. It's like, this is kind of what like streaming is like, and I was like, oh, that's actually like fairly a current concept. That's actually works pretty well. So again, it's like I said, there's stuff that's good in there, and the whole time you play it, you have to keep in mind that it's like there is the expectation that, and I know I say this as a joke about like it's a game for 10-year-olds, but like that is a thing, right? And like when I look at it through that lens, I'm like, oh, I would be okay with allowing like my 10-year-old or whatever when I one day play this game, because like the bad guys in it are really just kids who were bullied and stood up for each other for themselves, and then got like basically like labeled as the bad guys because they stood out for themselves. And I was like, oh, that's actually like a fairly interesting take on the sort of villains of the game. And like it made for like a slightly compelling story throughout there. There's no actual villains in this world like in this one that they've done here. And like honestly, that actually sort of feels more realistic than when they do have villains in their games, because very rarely do the villains ever make any sense. I mean, as much as I love Team Rocket, what the fuck is Team Rocket, right? Like, especially in the first, they make no sense. They're just like, we Pokemon. You're like, okay.
Like we steal Pokemon and we sell for Pokemon on the arcades and stuff.
Yeah, right. That's it. And just like, who's buying them though? Like, and the whole point of the game is that they don't listen to you unless anyway. It didn't make a lot of sense. But this one, you're like, oh, this actually kind of makes sense. Except the fact that they all own their own bases and stuff. You're like, how do these kids have this? This game is maybe the most the game that feels the most like it's a theme park that a bunch of kids take part in, right? Which I almost wish they would just like do that for the Pokemon series, because it really feels like it's not a real world. It feels like it is some giant amusement park that children get to go to, that like everybody's like doing things to help the kids. Because even the gym leaders, right? They talk about how it's like, oh, we have a bunch of kids who come through. But also some of the students look like they're 80. I don't understand how the students work in this. You see that, right, Paula? Like some of them you see, it's like,
Yeah.
student this, and you're like, that student looks like, even Mona, who's like your main rival, looks like she's like maybe 18, which that's fine. You're like, yeah, she might be just one of the older students. But then you have other students who look like they're in their 30s or 40s, and you're like, what?
What happened here?
What's going on here? And it's wish fulfillment, the game, big time, because you're like the greatest, like you're the best at everything. It's like chosen one hardcore, and that's fine. It's wish fulfillment for kids, right? Anyway, that's Pokemon Scarlet. Probably the best Pokemon game in a long time. I never finished Arceus, which I think tells you a little something about the structure of Arceus, which I think ended up becoming repetitive. So the fact that I actually beat this one, I think does indicate a level of quality to it. Um, but like, think about it, there's a lot of games that I think are even better that I don't finish. And this one actually did compel me to beat the game, and even compelled me to kind of play the post game stuff. So there is something to be said there. What?
You did complain every step of the way.
Oh yeah, with you guys, because that's the analysis. Like the moment to moment experience is really enjoyable. The reflection is where things get a little like, because you can sort of feel the moments where you're like, so like, to give you just like a concept, as I'm playing the game itself, I'm definitely not feeling that grumbling. Half the time I'm laughing because I'm like, holy shit, that's horrible looking. Anyway, Pokemon Scarlet. But Rick, why don't you tell us about something that is very different?
Yeah, you don't get much more different than a puzzle game where you spin a stick around to get it through 2D levels. Kururin Paradise is the kind of game that makes me glad I'm playing it now for free on a flash cart and not spending 20 to 30 pounds on a cartridge, because this thing's over in 2 hours tops. It took me about an hour and a half. Towards the end, I got a bit bored of it and I stopped trying to get like perfect runs through those levels. This one does a bit more to try and give you some variety. So there's a few sort of one-off inversions on the formula, whether that's like a doodle jump-esque, get yourself high and pick up collectibles thing, whether that's a Beyblade-esque knock some enemies out of the ring. There's a few other inversions. But it's just too little. And while the game is short, it still doesn't quite do enough to carry itself over the line. It also, unless I've missed something really obvious, doesn't have a credit roll. It just sort of ends. You get to the end of the path, and there's a few keys that you can pick up for a couple of branching paths. I unlocked those paths and never ended up taking them. Maybe there's a proper ending behind those, but I got to the end of the sort of main timeline of levels, and my protagonist was just sat there sort of smiling at me on the screen, dead-eyed with nothing else to do. It's good fun for an hour and a bit. I liked it. I didn't love it. I had an infinitely better time than I would have done playing Spin Frog, the game last week that inspired me to go and find and play this ROM. I think play the original. If you really need more, this is there. And eminently playable, even in Japanese. I don't have anything really profound or elaborate beyond that to say. It was fine. I'm glad I played it. I probably won't think about it again.
What, do you want to tell us about a game you probably won't think about again either? Or two games?
Well, I probably will think about both of these games coming forward.
Oh,
So as we
well,
move
there
into
you go.
retirements, I have 2 Game Pass games. Both soft retires. First one is Hi-Fi Rush. You might have remembered the past couple of times I talked about this game, kind of bemoaned that it kept turning the ticker on the bottom off that gives you guidance as to the beat. Now, I tried to play without it, and it was only in doing so that I realized why I'd struggled without it, and that's because the desync that I'd seen in the cutscenes with the audio is present in general gameplay as well. I'm not sure if that's my specific setup. I'm not sure if that speaks to my hardware maybe not quite being powerful enough just to maintain this game. But audio desync is anathema to a rhythm game. So
Is the
I have parked
calibration
this
not
one.
helping?
No, I couldn't get it to play nice. I did
weird.
have a bit of a fiddle around with it, but I couldn't make it happen. So I've parked this in level 3. I will gladly come back to it when I upgrade my PC, which is going to be happening sooner rather than later. I'm rocking a laptop from like 2015, 2016, and she served me well, but she is past her prime, shall we say. The second one is another Game Pass game called You Suck at Parking. This had a little bit of hype on release and then just sort of disappeared off the face of the earth. It's an isometric parking game. The concept being you cannot start your car again once it has stopped. So you have to drive around these zany levels with power-ups and obstacles and things like that and park in a number of predetermined points for each level. The gameplay is great. It's really, really good. It is just a little bit samey. In spite of the power-ups, in spite of the everything else. The biggest frustration for me was that rather than having a level list, the devs went the more elaborate route and had a big sort of interconnected overworld map that is really laborious to navigate and does not do a good job of highlighting where the levels actually are. There's nothing more frustrating than having the game hidden from you. So I found all the ones that were obvious to find, played for about 3.5 hours, had 3.5 hours of really good gameplay. I have to be clear, it's not a bad game by any means. It's a very good game. I had my fill. And while I may return to this down the line, I decided that rather than try and pull up a guide, in fact, that's a lie. I tried to find a guide with like what levels are where. It just doesn't exist, or at least not in text form. I took that as my cue to shelve this for the time being. If the pitch sounds like your jam, I absolutely encourage people to play the game. Like I said, I really did enjoy the game. Didn't feel the need to try and box every level off. I think judging by the number of crowns that are offered as a total in game, I maybe saw 50% of the content that's there roughly, and that does kind of chime with an 8-ish hour how long to beat time for the game. There is also an online component. I didn't try it out, but it does look interesting. And based on what little coverage there was of the game, it seems that was the focus of the package. But from a single player perspective, the content there is really, really, really good. Or certainly, the first half or so that I played of it was. So yeah, one, maybe two of these games I'll think about in future. Just to ruin your segue ever so slightly, Alex. Why don't you tell us about your retirement here?
Yeah, so I retired Mario and Rabbids, Spark of Hope. And Sparks of Hope. So again, this is also one that like you mentioned, like it's very good. Like there's nothing, I don't have any like major gripes with the game. I think if I did, the only thing is just that it's very samey. Like once you get through quite a bit of it, and because this isn't always an issue with strategy kind of RPGs, right? Actually, there's one that is definitely not an issue with that we'll talk about in a little bit. But with this one in particular, I don't know why, but it just started to kind of grate on me a little bit as like feeling a little too like been here, done that with a lot of the missions. And it just started to get, and like also they do ratchet up a little bit the complexity and the intensity, but you don't really feel compelled to like meet the game where it's at. You know what I mean? Like, how some games like really like they'll up the intensity and they really kind of push you to be like, yeah, and you want to also like you want to meet this game and you want to try to get better, and like you gotta like learn the systems and everything because like this is why it matters, and like they give you good story reasons to like care and try to push forward. And this one, it's just like, who gives a rat's ass? Like there's just who fucking cares? Like there's nothing to care about. Like the story is absurd and nonsensical and like not even really there because it's a Mario and Rabbids game. And the mechanics ultimately don't change much. What changes is the enemy types, right? Which again, fine. You don't really want strategy RPGs to like completely change up all the time. But there's no reason per se to swap who you're playing as with the characters. It feels a bit tedious to try and do so. And the actual mission variety is very samey throughout the entirety of the game. It's really just like, here's an area, go there. Yeah, I don't know. It just stopped appealing to me partway through, which is really too bad because like in some ways I think it's probably better than the first one, but maybe not because I beat that first one. And maybe the issue now is there's just too much out there at this point, like Mario and Rabbids, I think came out at a time on the Switch when there were some good games, but there wasn't like, a like deluge of them. But now at this point on the Switch, it's just like, there are a lot of good games out there.
I think I'd push back on that a little bit because obviously I played Mario and Rabbids, the first one, last year when I could have been playing Triangle Strategy or XCOM 2, or as you say, any other of the number of games
I
of
wasn't
its
even
ilk
thinking
on Switch.
strategy games on Switch. I'm just thinking
You're just
games in
thinking
general.
generally.
Yeah, no, not
Okay.
thinking of that. Yeah.
But the original is a certified classic.
Yeah.
Do you think maybe it's because it is a sequel, and so it's got
Maybe.
that to live up to, or is there something that maybe it's doing differently than the first one that hasn't worked for you in the same way?
I think it's been so long since I've played that first one. I feel like the first one had a
Did you finish the
stronger.
first one first of all?
Oh yeah, I did. Yeah,
You did.
I
Okay. Yeah.
feel like the first one. I even played beat the DLC for the first one. Like all the
I'm
Donkey
looking
Kong
forward to
stuff.
doing that myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I decided to pause it, but sorry, tangent.
I
Anyway,
feel like there was a stronger, perhaps, narrative push in the first one, and like maybe even that there might have even been less game in the first one. Because like if I try to pull this up right now, Mario and Rabbids.
hmm
Apologize for my clicking, folks. Mario and Rabbids. No, Sparks of Hope is technically shorter.
Oh, okay.
I don't know why, but it's just something that is not sticking with this one. Yeah.
I did wonder, looking at it, whether it was a case of there's like too much potentially in it. And that obviously is pure speculation because I haven't played the sequel yet, although I do intend to at some stage. But I do remember reading a preview write-up in Edge, and they were talking about various sort of team abilities that they'd added and sort of optional buffs for certain characters. And it did sound like, having had such success with the first one, they were throwing the kitchen sink at the second. But again, that's all conjecture from my point.
Someone actually has a good point on How Long to Beat here, where like one of the reviews it says like Sparkle is a typical Nintendo sequel, a complete departure from its predecessor. The structural overhaul and revamped battle systems give the player far more freedom than the first game, but some of the curated chaos is lost as a result.
The curated chaos is such a good way to describe the first game.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's part of what's lost in this game is that it really isn't curated chaos. Like it's very just like it's far more like to give you an example, there's so much more movement potential in this one that a lot of your fights are done fast, right? Because it's all just about like, can I dash everybody really quick and get out of here? To the point where it feels a little bit like in that first game, there was a lot more like zaniness, a little bit, almost cartoon zaniness that was really, really fun and felt very unique to it. Whereas in this one, there's just something that's missing from it. It almost feels a little too sterile in some ways.
Okay.
And yeah, I don't know. God, maybe I need to go back and look at the first game again a little bit and see what was going on in that first game to figure out what's going on here. But yeah, it just hasn't grabbed me. Like it definitely, and I think I'm seeing this in the reviews too. A lot of people are saying like you didn't feel any reason to keep going, and that's what I'm feeling in this game, right? Like I think in the first one, I kept feeling a reason to keep going, even if it wasn't narratively. It was like just to see like what the hell are they going to do next, right? Like you know what I mean?
More of a forward momentum, yeah.
Yes, there was this forward momentum of like what's happening because like they kept upping the ante, not necessarily in terms of narrative, but like of just weird shit that would happen in levels, right? And like the kind of insanity that you could do. Whereas in this one, there is no upping of the ante in that way. It's like, oh, now you have ghosts who can like poison you, I guess. And you're like, okay, cool. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just like, it's really just like the changes are just sort of like status conditions. And it actually feels less fun to do the fights and more just annoying because you're like, oh, I got to manage all these assholes. You know what I mean? And you're just like, all right, I'll go manage all of them and whatever. But whereas when you were playing in the earlier, like the game before, I think it just felt more varied, I guess. I don't know. That's a little bit of a meandering like rationale. I wish I could sort of pinpoint exactly why I'm feeling this way about the game. But all that to say is that it's not as good as the first one. I don't think. I think it is. I think in all aspects of like gaming, in terms of like, you know, like even like graphically, like feel, you know, mechanic, like all of that is perhaps, I don't know if objective would be right, but like kind of it's like objectively better in a sense, you know what I mean? Like it's more polished, but then the actual feel and enjoyment of the game, I think, has become diminished. It's almost like the wackiness of the first one and the like, yeah, and you know, part of it is the like, oh my God, this works feeling, right? Like there is that feeling when you first play it of where you're like, holy shit, how did they make this work, right? Like this is actually fun. But when you get into the sequel, you know it works. So as you're playing it, some of the novelty I think is just completely gone. And
And maybe there's a different expectation as a result. I think I get where you're coming from there.
right, that's at least how I'm feeling about it. Again, it's rated very well, so like I do highly recommend this game to folks, but I think I got what I needed out of it. Plus I had a certain Fire Emblem staring at me from across the room that was like, you know I'm better, and I was like, I do know you're better, sir. It was like anyway, with all that being said, that's the retirements. Why don't we jump in, and Paula, why don't you take over and tell us a little bit about what you're playing?
So first of all, I played a little bit more of Astro's Playroom, and I have to say the game is still so far so good, and I just love how they throw these little collectibles that are pretty much like pieces of PlayStation history, where like the main thing you collect on each level is the console itself. But as you go through the level, you can collect the controller, you can collect the memory card in the case of the PS1 or PS2. And I don't know, it's just like fun to see what else they included as a collectible. And it's just a little not a swan song, more like a lullaby to PlayStation's history in a way, because of how it manages to use everything in the PlayStation controller that they made for the PlayStation 5. And also they managed to go back in history and show you all this stuff that maybe for your newer PlayStation fan, it's not gonna be as impressive, or like, oh, what is this? Or maybe they just get a history lesson from whoever bought them the PlayStation. But for whoever has been playing for that long, it's like, oh, that's very cool. I wonder what else they included. And that's about it. I'm in the last world. I don't know when I'm gonna play it next because, well, it is my sister's PlayStation and my older sister's PlayStation, so I am not gonna be able to play it like as often as I would be able to play on my other consoles. But as soon as I get back into my sister's apartment, I'm beating that game. That's for sure. The other game that I've been kind of like poking at is Magikarp Jump. Just because I haven't had the time, like life happens, and I haven't had like as much time to play this week. I just been slowly chipping at it, and I'm past the second tournament or the second cup, and it's just silly fun, something to do while I'm mindlessly doing something else, and or like just existing, I guess, in public transport or whatever. So just some fun. And I got a few more Magikarp patterns because you can get like different Magikarp patterns on it. So I got the standard Magikarp, the Calico Magikarp that has white and orange, and the tricolor Calico that it has orange, white, and brownish black. And they're all super cute. And now I got like a little Magikarp, which pattern I haven't fully revealed, that is more like of a strip Magikarp. I hope this one gets me further and further, like at least halfway through the next tournament, because it took me 3 Magikarps to finish the second tournament, which isn't ideal. And I've surprise played Pokemon Scarlet. I wasn't expecting to play this one this week. So what happens is that I was just scrolling down Twitter, and one of my mutuals was asking for someone with Pokemon Scarlet to help them complete the Pokédex. So I offered as a tribute, and I volunteered as a tribute, and we traded, and I completed the Pokédex. At somewhere between 6 and 7 a.m. because time zones this morning, I completed the Pokédex on Pokemon Scarlet and Violet and received the Shiny Charm and a diploma because, of course, you gotta have those. And right now, and right after that, I decided to go shiny hunting. First for a Tatsugiri that didn't work out. And then for a shiny Eevee, I got a shiny squirrel and a Starly instead, which is still a shiny Pokemon, but it's not a shiny Eevee. I want my shiny Eevee. And I can't wait for Pokemon Home to be integrated into Pokemon Scarlet and Violet because I do have a shiny Eevee that I got on Pokemon Go, I think it was. Yeah, on Pokemon Go, which is waiting to be turned into a Sylveon. And that's about it. I'm still I went I had to pause a little bit the thing of making my team because I was a little bit tired of farming terra crystals. But now I am back and I'm gonna go competitive again, which knowing the next game is probably not a good idea because that means less time for playing other games like not High Five Rich, like Citizen Sleeper.
Exactly.
And the other thing is that I somehow got dragged into Pokemon TCG again by some a certain person that I'm looking at right now, which has been
Who
like
could it be?
pressing that mechanical keyboard for a while now. So like that, exactly. So my boyfriend wanted to go back into Pokemon because my nephew went back into Pokemon TCG, or like more like went back, just went into Pokemon TCG because everyone at his school was collecting cards. And since he calls a lot, and my boyfriend heard like the conversation about Pokemon cards, he was like, "Hey, I remember having fun with Pokemon cards. Why don't we play again?" And I'm like, I don't know. Those are expensive. And then it just so happens that one store made one of these not garage sales. It's like I don't know. They just went and did a huge sale, and I have to go to the store because it was like in store only, and get some stuff for my boyfriend. And just got tempted, and I got this little beautiful Alolan Vulpix box of Silver Tempest.
Cool.
It is a very beautiful Vulpix.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I also went into Pokemon Live, which is the kind of like the online app that lets you play Pokemon with friends over the internet and all over the world, or just play Pokemon TCG with strangers and get your ass kicked, which I kind of did this morning. So they do give you quite a lot of stuff like at the start. Like you don't start with puny decks. You start with some Stashian and some Azenta deck, and it is okay, I guess. But the one that won me a couple of matches was the Blissey deck. And the thing about that that one is that you have this one Pokemon and just have 4 copies of it, plus a Dunsparce because it has an ability that negates weaknesses for your team. And a lot of healing items. Blissey is a fucking wall. Like, big time. You can have, it usually has 250 HP, which most Pokemon be. That is like the EX kind of variant on this generation of Pokemon TCG, I guess. Or like the Sword and Shield generation of Pokemon, because EX are coming back. But that is another kind of ones. So you have your regular Pokemon, which if you knock out, you get one of your 6 prize cards. And if you get all the prize cards, you win. So usually you have Pokemon V that are quite stronger than your usual Pokemon, but they take up 2 prize cards if they knock it out. And then you have the Pokemon V Star. Was it the V Max or the V Star? I think it was the V Max. Where if they knock it out, your opponent gets 3 prize cards. So it's kind of like you get something that's quite a lot stronger, but you may be shooting yourself in the foot if you don't play your cards right, pun intended. And the thing with the Blissey deck is that since it's just such an insurmountable wall, because most Pokemon B, or like, I guess some of the most used Pokemon B are like 180 HP. And Blissey has 250 HP just to start, and then you can equip it with an item, and it goes up to 300. That's just disgusting. And then it has this attack, which costs only 1 energy card, where, how do I put it? The more energy cards you have, the stronger the attack is. And since it is a normal type, nothing is strong against normal types. So you're pretty much guaranteed to at least get the amount of damage that it says in the card. And also it has like this, I think it was like powerful or by powered or something among those lines, energy cards, where if you attach it to a Pokemon, it gives it like an extra 20 base power. So at the end of the game, I was just pretty much one hit KO on everything, because not only it does as much, not only does the higher damage, the more energy it has attached. If you have energies on your discard pile, you can attach up to 3, I think, to your Blissey, which means the next turn you're gonna make a bazillion more damage to the active Pokemon of your opponent, and they're gonna cry because they can't take out Blissey because you have items that can heal it up to 80 damage, which is again disgusting. But I played with it, and I actually had a lot of fun because of how I don't know, like usually when I'm playing with a very good something setup, whatever, I feel kind of like bad for the person that I'm playing against, especially if the person doesn't know how to play. But in this case, it was like, yeah, give me power, give me more power. Like, and the match went for so long because the other person didn't have any B or V star Pokemon. I think they have like 1, and they went with Kyogre and Groudon deck. And don't get me wrong, that deck was quite strong, but they couldn't get rid of my Blissey, so that's to leave them, I guess.
I think the moral of the story is don't let Paula go on a power trip.
Yep, pretty much. I don't know. I'm looking at some. Well, I guess my boyfriend got his hand on the Hisui and Zorak first, so I guess Paula can have fun with that either. He's looking at me like, what did I do?
Hmm.
And the thing is that I already said I play Mitos y Leyendas, and with that card game, the archetypes I love the most are the ones that, even though you're I guess you're getting damage dealt by your own strategy to yourself, you're hitting like harder than your opponent is, so in the end you win by that. So the thing is that this Hisuian strategy that we've been mostly my boyfriend has been researching is that Hisuian Sword does more damage depending on the amount of, I guess, damage counters you have on your Pokemon, and that means like if your bench Pokemon has received any damage, Zorak will make Hisuian Zorak will make more damage the more damage Pokemon you have. So it's kind of like you need to shoot yourself in the foot first, and then you can shoot your opponent. And that kind of strategy is something that is calling out to me, but someone beat me to it. As well as with the music, because there were in the store some. They're called the battle deck something. And the thing is that they are like higher level play decks for learning to play like at higher blah, 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 at a higher level.
Mhm.
And there aren't like the pre-built decks that only have like, let's say, one main Pokemon, one copy of it, and then they have some random crap around. Though they're getting better. They're getting a lot better. But they aren't like made for competitive play. They're just made for you having fun with your friends. Well, this other deck is made for, hey, do you want to learn to really play Pokemon TCG? Here you go nuts. And the Mew one is not only Mew is one of the cutest Pokemons ever and one of my favorites, and I wanted to play that one, but they beat me to it again. It is also pretty freaking strong. So I have this one deck from 2012, and you know, power creep is a thing on TCGs. And I got this Darkrai Zorak deck where I'm not gonna go into strategy, but back in the day, it was very good. Like it won me a lot of matches. Now it got utterly destroyed by the music, which was pre-built, still level 3 or like higher level pre-built deck. But the power creep was so impressive, I guess, that I just went out of my way and got a pre-built deck myself, because it was like, okay, that's how they get you. If you want to play competitively, or like if you want to play at all with your friends that are having the newest Pokemon cards, you have to have the newest Pokemon cards, because otherwise you get decimated. So yeah. And the good thing about the Pokemon Live TCG is that you don't have to spend any money. You can, because for each physical booster pack that you get, or like each physical thing that you get, you can scan a code on the app and get the exact same booster pack, deck, whatever on your PC.
Mhm.
Some people just sell like a bazillion codes for like peanuts, and I guess I'm just gonna go into my digital Pokemon TCG adventures again, because physical Pokemon TCG adventures are way too expensive and I have budget. So that is the end of my adventure there. I wish I wish I was playing Fire Emblem Engage, but that is not the case. But some other person here is playing Fire Emblem Engage. So Alex, take it away.
Okay. Yeah, so not to bury the lead clearly. I finished off Pokemon Scarlet because I was like, I gotta finish this goddamn game. I want to play Fire Emblem. And I started Fire Emblem Engage. I might be close to where you are, Paula. I'm currently on chapter 11, I think.
That is where I am.
Okay, nice. So I'm where you are then. Yeah, because I've gone through this. Like I went pretty hard
Again.
because this is all I could play, right? Like I was on vacation, so I just brought my Switch with me, and we had a long flight. So I was just like, yeah, I'll be playing this, and then at night it's like, yeah, well, when I'm winding down, I'll play some Switch, that kind of stuff. So I've just been really just playing Switch games. So like I have technically Dead Space and Hi-Fi Rush on here, but I just haven't had a chance to play them because I wasn't home. Though I will be playing them a lot more now. But yeah, this game's great. This game's very good. It's Fire Emblem. It's a little. I think I like Three Houses more. I think as I'm playing through this now. I know you didn't like that one, Paula, but I don't understand why you didn't like that one.
Is the social sim aspect of it?
Yeah, and I
it
love
just got
that
the
shit.
word out of my
Fire Emblem
mind.
is so about social aspects, right? Like the support systems have always been a part of it. So to me, anyway, the social aspect of Fire Emblem Three Houses felt like the natural continuation of Fire Emblem. Like it felt like what Fire Emblem was kind of always trying to do, make you care about your units a lot, right? Make them a part of your life and of your world. What I think is stronger in this game is that it's one unified narrative, whereas, Three Houses splits it up into three narratives that I hear are all equally quite interesting. It's just realistically, you're probably not going to go back and actually play the other two narratives. So and technically it's like four narratives. So having this one narrative that, I don't know, maybe it branches off at some point. I'm not sure yet. It hasn't yet, though it definitely looks like it's at a point where it could maybe. Like something big's happening right now where I'm in the game, and it's really interesting. But so far, I'm really liking the fact that it's like a pretty contained experience thus far. The weapon wheel is back. I think that's fine. It's nice to see it return. I actually think they were making some real interesting strides without it in the other Fire Emblem game, in Three Houses. I actually thought it was kind of neat that they didn't have it anymore. But, it's okay. It's nice to have it there. It gives you that strategy. It gives you another thing to think about when creating your kind of team optimizations. Do I have enough axes? Do I have enough lances? Do I have enough, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So again, that's fine. The emblems are interesting. I'm hoping they're going to explain these a little bit more in the game. So far, they're actually kind of terrifying as a concept. It's like the trapped souls of humans from other worlds.
Right?
They're fucked. It's like, here's your ring slaves that only this dragon can unlock. Let me put it this way. If Three Houses was Game of Thrones, this is Lord of the Rings. Two incredible series, right? Wonderful, my favorite things on the planet. But they have very different concepts to them, right? Three Houses was trying to be a little bit more of a layered and sort of nuanced look at the politics of a world that you're in, right? And that was really the focus of that game. Like, it was like, there was like some fucked up shit that would go on, right? And there were like alliances would get betrayed. People turn out to not be who you thought they were. You met them when they were kids, and then you get to see them as they're older, right? Like, there's this real interesting sort of nuance that happens in there. Whereas this game is more this sort of it really is traditional Fire Emblem. Like, and I mean like really traditional Fire Emblem, where it's like bad dragon, good dragon. Like that's like really what this game boils down to. And the characters are wonderful. Like Boucheron is my favorite dude in the world. This big muscly guy who's like very sensitive and just like likes to fish and cries at novels. He's the greatest man out there. Major crush on that dude. the characters are wonderful, right? Like they're still, although Fire Emblem, you can like ease up on the tits. That's all I'm saying. Just like, I don't know what it is with anime designs, but like, oh my God. It's like there's no, okay. Every woman in these anime inspired games are two things. They either look like they're fucking 12 or like they're straight out of like a photoshopped Playboy magazine where it's just like ginormous boobs. And that there is no in between on that spectrum. It is like, that's it.
I mean, they managed to do both on some cases, but that is...
Yeah, in some cases they're
And
like,
I, for one, don't see the problem with that.
it gets weird when like, because the dudes get to have like this dope, like fucking crazy armor. And like some of the girls get that. But a lot of them just have the skimpy, and like, okay, there's one lady that came on screen. And like, again, I don't care, like whatever. Some people want their characters to look, you know, hot in anything. That's fine. I don't mind if you want your characters to look hot. But like this one girl comes out and she's got this like flowing like dress and armor and stuff. And she's she's in combat, but she just has a section. Like she has like her clothing goes around her neck. But then there's just a hole. There's just a fucking hole in her like shirt, and it's just like cloth, and it's just a hole to show off her cleavage. And it's like, what is this? Why is this here? Like, it makes no sense. They're warriors. What is going on? Like, God, I don't know. I think I'm getting old. But as I'm looking at it, it's like they're trying to make me buy into this world, and then you get these costuming, like one of the characters has little hearts all over their faces and clothing, and like one girl has like a little star underneath. Like, it's really, I think Fire Emblem in general benefited from having sprite art where you couldn't see how freaking nuts some of their character designs were. But I don't know if it's just me, but this game feels like Fire Emblem Three Houses did it a little bit, right? It started to lean a little more into like, and I hate to, actually, this might be relevant for the conversation we'll have later, but like, and I say anime aesthetic, but really I mean like a very specific type of anime aesthetic, like the fan servicey sort of aesthetic that comes in. And it feels as though this game in particular is like leaning even harder into that, to the point where some of the character designs just don't look like they fit in the world that they've created here, where it's like, oh, I feel like I could see that as like a mascot for something in the world, but not in what? Like, I don't know, Paula, do you find that at all? Like, you know what I'm talking about a little bit? Like,
yeah, I know. Like, especially like Toothpaste Chan or Pepsi Kun, which are the protagonists of the game.
what the
Sorry, but whenever you start to say like, oh, the dudes get such like, I guess, functional armor, I started laughing because the other day when I was on Twitter, I think it was the Barbarian armor. I am sending it to you right now.
Mm-hmm.
They want fan service for the.
Oh my God, they've just done it now too, huh? This is one of the variants, right? Yeah, okay, but that to me though, that doesn't count because that's variants, right? Like, that's fine, right? Like they do that for everything, right? Yeah, cool. The male characters now. Oh man, one of those Amber's going really low down there, man. They're not leaving much to the imagination. But no male character is designed like this. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, this is a variant that they'll add on for fan service and they get someone some thirst trapping. But like, none of the male characters are introduced like that, right? Whereas one of the villains straight up got no clothes on. There's no clothes on this lady. Like, she's like one of the casters. She's just got little things that I'm like, how does that logistically stay on this lady? Because you're like,
and I for one don't see a problem with it.
Got a lot of tape or something all over the place.
That is all by the will of the writers.
Yeah, I know, right? So anyway, I just like keep in mind, folks, if you're gonna get into this game, that you're gonna see a lot of that. Like, it's a lot of that sexualized costuming for the women, which some are like, I am in now. And that's fine, right? Like, if you like that, that's cool. It's just like, I personally find it a little more difficult to buy into the world that they're trying to create when you do that kind of stuff. Because it's like, it feels so entirely odd and out there, right? And like one of the characters, Unicut, like acts really weird. I'm like, it's fine, but like there's a lot more of the like gesturing stuff that you're like, all right, cultural thing that I'm not really into, but that's fine. Maybe this is a thing that others just find cute and endearing, and that's okay. You know what I mean? Not everything's made for me. That's fine. But it has kind of been like gnawing at me just a little bit as I'm playing the game, where I'm like, why are we? Oh, hi, you. And some of them I'm just like, you're never going to be on my team. You know, I'm just going to bench you for now. So anyway, and again, not every character's like that, but yeah, there's a lot who are in cutscenes. It makes it really hard to play this goddamn game sometimes, but like I'm like,
I don't know. I've been so desensitized to all of anime stuff that it's like, okay, I'm just vibing here.
I know, but that's
Nothing
the
to see.
issue, right? It's like I want more people to love Fire Emblem, and I see this as a legit thing that could really turn a lot of people away from this game. And I think why partially this game has been scoring a little less than Three Houses is that Three Houses had less of this shit, and it had more like genuine relationships between the characters, which made you really give a shit about your combat. It's been dialed back, and like, listen, the combat scenarios are incredible. Like the strategic combat in this game, awesome, and they've streamlined some shit really well. The Somnial's still lovely. It's fun to walk around it. It's a good break in between your battles, but I don't think this is a better game than Three Houses. I think it's a phenomenal Fire Emblem game, but I have a feeling this game has lost a lot of the new people who enjoyed Three Houses, and ultimately will probably be viewed as a misstep in the series in terms of direction. Had this come out before Three Houses, wicked. This coming out after Three Houses, it's not going to work. I love it because I fucking love every Fire Emblem game. I am a diehard for this. I'm a ride or die, right? I don't give a shit what they do to Fire Emblem. I'm going to be there, you know? Like, I have played so many of these games, I'm in. But it's a bit like, do you know what this feels like to me, actually? And Paula, it's like, it's Awakening to Revelations, right? Or Awakening to, like, the Conquest and all those other ones. It's like that look there. Where, and I think there was a game in between those. I can't remember. But, like, in terms of main series Fire Emblem, this really feels like, you know, Fire Emblem Awakening introduces this incredible stuff and it creates this incredible story. And then you get the three, Conquest, Revelations, and what was the other one? Rebirth? Was that it? Birthright. Those three, which again, I love them, but consequently lost some people, right? And I don't know what it is, but, and again, I like that Fire Emblem likes to explore and change things up a little bit. And this does kind of bring the game down to its roots, like really brings it to its roots big time. But I don't know. I'm probably overblowing it a little bit, but I am concerned. I feel like this game is not selling nearly as well as Three Houses. I mean, think about Three Houses' cultural breakthrough. That game was huge. People were talking about that game forever. Like, it was ginormous. Fire Emblem Engage happened, and I feel like no one's talking about this game. It is just gone. You know what I mean? Like,
I have to say that a lot of people from on my Twitter just went to Three Houses because of like the more relationship aspects of the game.
yeah, and the relationship aspects were great.
And like the more not life sim, but kind of like the almost persona-ish in between battles aspects of the game. And they really dig that, and they were like, hey, that is gone. And even though I have fun with this game, like it is not my favorite because of that. And to what I say that I'm in the other camp of the Fire Emblem spectrum, like I didn't like that more life sim aspect of the game, or like micromanaging your army by educating it. I'm like,
yeah, you didn't have
I'm here
to do
for
that,
the battles
though.
and the battles alone.
Yeah. But again, and I understand what you're saying about that, Paula, but Fire Emblem has never been about the battles alone, right? Like, as a series, like maybe super early on, but even then, there was the whole point of like the support, the skirmishes. Like, there's always an aspect of building and recruiting and training your army. That's always been a major part of Fire Emblem. So like, I totally understand what you're saying, and like I agree with you that I think there are aspects of Three Houses that could have been dialed back a little bit, but it feels like they clawed it back, right? Like they took away everything that they had done, and they have some of it in the Somnial. There's some things, right? Like you do still train your students. You can train them, but they're not your students per se. Your army, you still get to train. Um, and that aspect feels really good. I'm just missing a little bit of some of the social elements. Some of the support conversations are fucking stupid. Like the bonds with
Yep.
right? Like the Emblem bond conversations. One of them is literally like, I'm so glad you're here now. Me too. You're such a lovely person. Thank you. That's the whole bond conversation. Like I shit you not, like that is only a slight exaggeration. I think there might have been one or two more lines. It was a meaningless conversation.
Yeah, like that was such a missed opportunity because you have all these characters from prior Fire Emblems that are
mhm,
beloved by many,
mhm.
and they just give them more to say. They give them more like to grab people and say, "Hey, I kind of like the personality of this lady or this gentleman over here. I wondered how they're like in their game, and maybe if they give like glimpses of the story maybe from the other games, then they can have like people going back to those games."
Because they're entirely personalityless. Like they have
Yeah.
no personality at all as things. Which maybe there's something later in the game that explains this, but for now they're just like empty vessels. Right? Like,
Yeah.
and they talk. Marth talks to you, but Marth has no personality. Like he's just like a dude. Which, to be fair, I don't know if Marth ever had a personality. Which is
Yeah, he's always been like,
Mhm.
oh, I'm doing this because of the power my friends lend me and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's always been kind of bland.
Yeah.
But then you have Celica, who has like such a strong-headed personality in
Yeah.
not in Gaiden, in Echoes,
Yes.
and then she's just there.
She's
So
just
you get
there.
a little glimpse of Sigurd, and they
Sigurd
didn't
is
show
the
any
most
more.
personality. Yeah.
Yeah.
But very little because he's kind of stern, right? But then you don't see anything else, like you said. Yeah, it just kind of vanishes. All this is to say that this is still incredible. Like this game is incredible. Like don't get me wrong, it is fucking awesome, and everyone should play it. The thing that just makes
But-
me sad is that it's lost a little bit of what made Echoes. No, not Echoes. Sorry, Three Houses so fantastic. So anyway,
Echoes is fantastic too.
Echoes is fantastic. Look, listen, there is not a bad Fire Emblem game as far as I'm concerned. I have never played a bad Fire Emblem game. They're all like 9 out of 10s for me, at least. There are some that maybe lean close to the 8 territory, but God, they're all incredible. And this one is also incredible. Whereas for me personally, Three Houses was like a 9.5. This is like a 9, you know what I mean? And that is just like the testament to the quality of it. It looks awesome. The cutscenes are great. The cutscenes also tell you why Pokemon was weird, because Pokemon's cutscenes had no voice acting, and in this one, the voice acting is very good. Even like I'm playing it in English, and the voice acting is quite good, honestly. Even with some of the lines that are very silly, because Fire Emblem has always been a little silly. Like it's a lot about friendship and like love and all that. Although there's like I still don't care about some of the deaths of like the main, like not the people in your party, like the main people when they die. There's like a big long thing at the beginning of the game. You know what I'm talking about, Paula, right? Where like someone important dies,
Yep.
but you don't even know who they are. And also they're so boobalicious that you're really distracting. Like you're just like, this character dies and you're like, oh, I see. It's like this, there's like a character who's like minor spoiler. It's hardly even a spoiler. It's in the first like 30 minutes. I won't say who it is, but there's a character that is many, many centuries old who looks like, something. And so like, yeah, and you're just like, okay, that's interesting, I guess. And then they have this really drawn out death moment, and you're like, I don't care. Can I get to the fighting? So anyway, that's so common in Fire Emblem games, though, and some people probably really will get invested early on. Anyway, the story.
The other thing.
Mhm.
Before I forget, my boyfriend said I have this take over here that is Fire Emblem Engage system, that is the ring system, the emblem system, sorry, is Pokemon terrestrialization in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Because you change the type of, not the type, but in this case you change the I guess, weapon affinities of the character, and you gain more abilities. And you could have like literally an assassin turning into a healer, or like a
Mm-hmm.
cavalier turning into a swordsman.
Exactly, right? Like that is what it is. And like I enjoy it to that extent, right? Like I think the emblems are cool. And the rings are
hmm
neat. Like I like adding all the rings to people and stuff. Like that's fun and whatnot. Though it's kind of clear, and I'm still not sure I understand how to properly use the rings in some ways. Like I just kind of have them on the characters that it clearly seems like they're supposed to be on. Though it seems to imply that you could switch the rings around a little bit. But I'm like, I don't know if I should do that. So I'm a little nervous to like switch things up too much with it, but you're totally right. Like you're both spot on. It is terrestalizing. It's just like here's the gimmick for this game, right? So yeah, that's Fire Emblem. Great, love it, recommend it. Just little flaws. So I'm also playing actually because I had this on my Fantasy Critic thing, and I don't know why I was just really craving a rhythm-based game. So I got Theatrhythm. I don't know how to pronounce this game. Theatrhythm? Theatrhythm?
I've always said Theatrhythm, but I don't think there's a wrong way to say it.
Yeah, right? I think it's Theatrhythm. Final Bar Line on the Switch. So this is the new one. I also bought some of the DLC actually because I really wanted to play some of the Live Alive game levels, and do not regret. Super awesome. And it also came with some of the Saga ones, and like there's more. There's like The World Ends With You is coming, and like a whole bunch of other like really good tracks are coming along. And also, it's not a full price game, and you get like 435 tracks just to start. So I was like, you know what? I don't mind throwing y'all a little bit of money. Like, I feel like you're not cheating me here a little, you know what I mean? I'm like, I'm okay with throwing you a little extra dough because, wow, this is a really fucking good game. Like, it is so good. You get to play through like so many Final Fantasy games, like Final Fantasy Legend as well, Chronicles, like all these other ones, and obviously all the mainline ones. Very similar, I think, to Curtain Call, which was the one before, but just like way more expanded, and just kind of has everything now. And I think I would say it's like pretty definitively like the definitive way to play now. Like it replaces Curtain Call for sure. And like, you know what I mean? Like you could go play Curtain Call if you want, but it's just like, why do that if you could just get this one? Because this really makes a case for itself as like, this is the one you should play. Because especially because it's all the way up to now, right? And oh my god, the rhythm is so good in this. Like the fucking, because any button you can click, right? And then you have your sticks to like hit up, down, and like all around kind of thing, right? And so what feels really good on the Switch is using the shoulder buttons as your buttons for it instead of the face buttons, because then you could have both your fingers on the shoulder buttons and then both fingers on the sticks. And oh my god, is it comfortable, especially on a Switch Lite. I'm like, oh, this is incredible.
That might answer one of my questions about it, because I've seen clips with it with the multiple lines hitting at once. Is that just hitting multiple buttons to activate them, basically?
Multiple buttons. They'll only ever give you two at a time to hit, which you might think at first, like, that doesn't sound like much. Oh boy, when you start to get into the higher difficulties, it's a fucking lot.
I believe it. I mean, Curtain Call with one line can get nuts, though. So, like, yeah. That was my thing. I was like, hang on, how, what? Excuse me, beg your pardon, what? Sorry, what?
It's so good. They have done something so, feels so unique in terms of rhythm gaming. And like, because basically the way this works, there's like 3 basic note types. There's a hold note, there's a flick in a direction note, and then there's a tap note, right? Those are the 3 basics. But the way that they change those around is fascinating, because you have okay, so those are the 3 note types, and then there's 2 types of tracks. There's the battle track, where you're kind of you stay in one spot and enemies come to you, and that has 4 lines, right? And so you're clicking, and you might have doubles, all sorts of stuff. Then there's the movement track, which is sort of, showing, your adventurers as they're out in the world fighting. And in those ones, when you hit a hold note, you actually have to use one of the sticks to follow the note as it goes up and down and around and whatnot, which is actually really fun as you go through, and works really well because they have something that's keeping you like sort of tied to it decently enough. It works really, really well. It's very intuitive. At first it's a little, you're like, oh my god, how am I gonna ever do this? But once you've done it a few times, it's very intuitive. There's no like story mode or anything, which I actually think is completely fine. I would think this would be a little weird and redundant if there was a story mode. And honestly, I think the fact that there isn't one is what allows them to have 435 goddamn things in this and so much stuff. And technically, you are kind of playing through a like reduced version of each of the games because each of the like moments are like tied to the game itself, right? Like you're playing through the music as it goes along. Essentially, you get to play through each of the games itself, right? And you unlock them, the key, and then when you get in, you play a few stages until eventually you'll get a chest that allows you to unlock another one, right? So you can go through and unlock a bunch. Minor RPG elements to it. You unlock characters from each of the games. As you unlock their kind of game itself, you can put them in. They all have special abilities and whatnot. Some are healing types, attacking types, whatever. And that plays toward the quest that's in each one of them, because as you go through the series mechanics, you'll have little quests that you are going to try to beat. And so your characters can help you get those quests, right? And those quests will give you fun things like collectibles. Sometimes they'll give you items. Sometimes they'll give you costumes for your Moogle, or like, it might give you a new character even sometimes, or it'll give you like, some of them, if they're like really important, might give you like a music video level that you can play. Though usually if you complete a series, you'll get one of those, which like gives you some kind of like video from the game itself that you can play, where now instead of because usually the notes are on the right hand side of the screen, they'll be at the bottom of the screen, and you can like watch something play out as you play it.
Sounds very similar to Curtain Call. You played Curtain Call, right?
I played some of Curtain Call. I know.
Yeah.
I think I own Curtain Call, or owned it. I might have turned it. I might have actually traded it in a long time ago.
It sounds pretty similar to just like the quote unquote dungeons it had in there.
Yes.
And it's all basically an excuse to play the songs, and it doesn't really change how those songs are played, but it is a progression.
And it actually is really nice because it gives you a very clear, like, instead of just having this like daunting list of songs that you're like, oh sweet Jesus, right? And you're like, I gotta get through all of these. Instead, it gives you this really bite-sized chunks that you can go through, and it feels good to just complete a game. Right? Like you're like, oh nice, I just beat that. And so like I see myself probably playing this for a long time, because it's a super nice, like in between a few sessions, like, oh, I'm gonna pound out like 5-10 songs, done, right?
Yeah.
And you get the nice, like, you get to see the levels up, and like you get all the perfect chains and whatnot, and like, and the music, holy, there are not many series that can boast the fucking music that this series boasts, because holy shit is it good. Like, damn, man. Even if some of the, like, you know what? Here's the thing. We can all debate and question the kind of quality of the Final Fantasy individual games, right? But one thing that I think is not really as up for debate is the quality of the music, because shit, it's good. And even the worst Final Fantasy games, like, honestly, okay, Final Fantasy Legend, like or like Mythic Quest, like that one on the SNES that's not like super good, the music is fucking amazing. It's some of the best music in the entire like Theatrhythm game. Like, I turned it on to start and I was like, holy shit, this rocks. Like, it's just like super intense and really, really fun. And so yeah, and there's all these little, this cute chibi art style, and all these little guys come up and fight you, and it's a great game. So anyway, Theatrhythm, Final Bar Line, highly recommend it. I say just buy it full price. You know what I mean? It's not like a full, it's super expensive game. It's budget title. I'm happy to support this kind of content. You know what I mean? Where I'm like, hey, Square, like, why don't you let your companies put out these kind of things and don't riddle them with microtransactions and just let them be fine? Because technically it has microtransactions, right? But it's very tangible ones where it's like, it's more tracks.
But Alex, don't you know that NFTs are the future?
I know, right? Fuck. They killed Chocobo Racing too, which apparently was actually a pretty fun game, because they actually have working for them a series of really talented developers, and they tend to shoot them in the foot. But at least they haven't shot these guys in the foot, because they've made something really special here that I highly recommend. Anyway, Rick, why don't you tell us? I know this is going to be a long one today, but there's just so much to talk about.
Long ones back to back, which So to be fair, I've not got loads to say about the ones I'm still playing. FF7 Remake continues to entertain and enthrall me, albeit I am back to sort of dipping in and out of it, bits and bobs. That is because I've been dedicating a lot of time to the other two games I'm still playing from last week, being Muramasa Rebirth. God, I forgot how much I love that game. Just exceptional. And Voice of Cards, the Isle Dragon Warriors. This one has sort of sunk its teeth in a little bit. It's a very easy game to just let the vibes and the atmosphere sort of wash over, and it is very much geared that way. Like the aesthetic is the USP. From an RPG standpoint, most of the things it's doing are pretty standard. There's nothing, earth-shattering in terms of the genre, in terms of mechanics. But, and I hate to belabor the point, the fact that it is all card-based. Everything's cards. The map's cards. The characters are cards. Your items are cards. Attacks are everything is cards. Which, yes, voice of cards should be obvious, but it bears repeating. It's not, there's some cardy bits and then it's a normal game. It's all fucking cards.
It's cards all the way down.
Always has been. And that elevates the experience. There's this, I kind of ignore him. There's this D&D voiceover thing sort of going on in the back, like Game Master sort of thing, which probably, has its appeal to certain people. I am very much the kind of person that normally skips through those, and I've continued to do so. The art is lovely. The animations are lovely. The transitions are great. The RPG side of things is well balanced. It's been engrossing, and it's been the game I've sort of been going to in the time I have had this week to play games a bit more. I've also got a couple of new ones on there, two of which I've played briefly. Firstly, Tokyo 42. This is a PC game I've owned for the longest time and never got around to playing. I finally started it. It is a isometric cyberpunk sort of twin stick shootery sort of thing. The idea is you are framed for a murder you didn't commit. A friend helps you escape your apartment. You're now on the run. And what better way to clear your name than becoming an assassin and murdering loads of people to get to the bottom of why you've been accused of murdering some people. It's very generic in terms of the story thing, but it's got quite a bright sort of block pastel color, low poly look to it. It's very atypical of the cyberpunk genre, and I think it makes it stand out visually. So far, the gameplay's been fine, but I am only like 15 minutes in. I'm not sure the isometric view is necessarily the best choice, based on my initial experience and also based on the general sort of Steam review consensus. But so far, so good. And a little bit of Desta, The Memories Between. So I recently found out that this is actually ending its Netflix exclusivity period. It is coming to Switch and Steam. But for all of the time I was aware of this game was a Netflix exclusive. It's from the people who made the Monument Valley games. It is a turn-based, isometric, dodgeball, confronting your demons and past trauma by way of dream volleyball game. Which is an interesting concept. Yeah, but it kind of works. And it's interesting as a Brit. This is a game that's set in Manchester, which is a country sort of in the Midland, a country, a big city in the Midlands. And it's very obviously taken voice actors who can do that accent. There's sort of elements of, inner city living that seem to have bled into the environmental design and stuff like that. Early doors, two things that have surprised me. One is that the writing's as on the nose as it is. So it's like, being a social worker, my dad, this and that. It's like, I hate when you start sentences like being an X, Y. It's just lazy and on the nose. And I hope that improves because I think the narrative is a core focus of what they were trying to do with this game. Second thing that surprised me is this game does seem to be a roguelike, which I wasn't expecting. I'm sure I'll have more to say on that as I play more of it, but it does look really pretty, and the mechanics of the game are very, very intuitive. Gives the initial impression of being very, very deeply layered and complex while also very approachable, which is good. My new obsession and the last game I've been playing this week is Marvel Snap. So this is the Marvel Hearthstone-like sort of thing on mobile. And a few of my normie friends play it and have been nudging me for a little while to give it a try. And last weekend I did. And I, as much as I'm loving the game, I kind of wish I didn't, because it is very, very addictive. I have to say, pleasantly surprised at how very hands-off the wallet grabbing is. There's your standard sort of shop tab in the corner. You can buy cosmetics and get a bit of a head start on some of the resources that you use to level up your character progression and unlock new cards and things like that. However, as a freeloader, the game is very, very approachable, very playable. In the initial week of playing, very generous with what it gives you without asking for your money. There is a battle pass. The current battle pass run is full of very niche card opportunities and things, so I haven't felt the compulsion to buy it. And I do feel like I'm still getting a lot from the game without it. It's very patently not pay to win. You can't outright buy cards. I almost wish you could, because I actually wouldn't have minded throwing a couple of pounds their way for the odd card. But it's a 3-lane game. It's over 6 rounds. It's clearly been play tested to hell because it's very finely balanced. It's very engaging. The games are deceptively quick, and it absolutely has that one more match. What's the word I'm looking for? That one, not one more match feel, but it engenders that, oh, I'll just play one more before I stop sort of thing. And you blink and an hour's gone. It is very, very good. And we'll see how much longer I feel that way about it, I guess. I can't see myself stopping anytime soon. Again, in part, because I've got IRL friends who are playing it and talking about it and what have you. But it has been a pleasant surprise. So I did expect to sort of jump in and jump out very quickly, but I have been finding myself pretty frequently sort of dipping into it. That is me for my playing. Obviously, I'm still playing Daily Daddish in the background, but it's more daddish. No one needs to hear about that at this moment in time. That is otherwise all that I'm playing. Should we jump into our topic this week? And do you want to sort of lead us into this, Alex? Because this was your brainchild.
Yeah. As I type the show notes in here. Okay. So yeah, this we want to talk this week about the idea of JRPG kind of as a derogatory term, because this has sort of come out quite recently, because the director of Final Fantasy 16, I believe it's Naoki Yoshida. Yeah. So he came out to talk about how the term JRPG felt really kind of derogatory, especially when it first came out, because when like Japanese developers sort of first heard of this term, and Jimquisition did a really great video about this actually, and this sort of sparked this idea because when that term sort of first appeared, or at least like at the very beginning, I think, you know, in the West, it certainly, I don't think, was necessarily deemed as something sort of derogatory, right? Like it was a way to sort of categorize, and often was a label of quality for games that came out kind of on the SNES and whatnot, right? Like it was like, and the NES and the SNES, but like to indicate these sort of long games that had like sort of turn-based element to them, etc. But then I would say in the aughts and like the 2010s and whatnot, there was certainly a major element of, you know, games journalism, but just also game developers. Like there's a really terrible panel that happened a while back about this sort of concept, and Jimquisition shows it in the video as well. And it became this kind of synonymous with the idea that like these are games that aren't up with the times, right? Like it's like, oh, those weird games from Japan, right? Like there was a lot of that sort of feeling that I think was imbued into it. And so Yoshida kind of talks about how like when they first heard of this term, it felt extremely derogatory because, and like you can see that he gets like visually uncomfortable when the term is brought up, because obviously in Japan they obviously don't call them JRPGs, right? Like they're RPGs, you know, and with like further different breakdowns. And it feels a lot like this sort of pigeonholing of games into this like very sort of kind of basic category. And it's something that I hadn't really thought of. And obviously we hadn't really thought of this because it's so kind of ingrained here. And what I was sort of more interested in, because I think, and I've seen this conversation actually, it's been happening on the forum a little bit too, where people are like, I think feeling a bit defensive of the idea of JRPG being derogatory. And one thing that I'd like to say, and we can talk about this a little bit, but you know, I understand that there is a cognitive dissonance that occurs, right? When one is told that a term that they use and have used for a long time is not seen positively by the group that is directly impacted by said term, right? There can be a defensiveness, I think, that comes out in the sense of like, yeah, but I don't mean it that way, right? And like, no one's saying anyone's a bad person for using the term JRPG and having used it, right? What I think is important, though, is that now that you know that, say, these developers and that many in Japan find this term to be frankly degrading, maybe it's time we try to think if there's a better one. And I think, too, the Jimquisition kind of rightfully sort of points out, it's not a very good term, right? Like, I think even if we, and this is what I sort of want to talk about together, is that like defining an RPG as a JRPG, as a Japanese role-playing game, we kind of know what that means, but what about games like Chained Echoes or like Chris Tales or like these games that are coming out, right, that are not made in Japan and very much fall under the mold, though, of a game that you're like, oh, but this reminds me of the JRPG. So anyway, I'm curious to hear like your thoughts in general on this topic, but then I also thought that we could kind of break down like what elements of it do we think could fit into a different sort of conversation, because even when I think of JRPG, I don't label Fire Emblem as one, right? Even though it has elements of it, it's a strategy RPG for me, right? So anyway, yeah, I just want to know like what are your general thoughts on the idea of this, or like learning of the idea of it being derogatory. And like when I heard that, it kind of felt like obvious to me. Like I was like, oh duh, of course it is, but I never really thought of it that way. So anyway, curious.
I think there's a lot of layers to this one. I mean, firstly, I think it's obvious to say that JRPG as a bracket, as a descriptor, sucks for a long time because, like you say, there's a lot of Japanese-made RPGs that you wouldn't call JRPGs, and there's a lot of things that should fall into it and don't, and vice versa. It doesn't necessarily work in that sense. I also don't necessarily think it's the problem. I think it's a symptom of a particular feeling sort of in the late noughties, early 2010s, that Japanese developers were falling behind, that there was an anachronism, things that about their approach to game design that are archaic. I think that's epitomized by the Phil Fish quote, your games suck, to someone who went up as a genuine fan and, wanted to hear this guy's input and just got a diss. Yeah. I think the problem at the core of the quote wasn't necessarily the term so much as a particular moment in time in gaming and how developers from a part of the world and their creations were perceived. So I think there's almost two things at play there.
Yeah, I guess my thing, like the slight push on that, is that like, but that term is associated with that time. You know what I mean? Like,
I call that a separate thing. I think it's a thing, and that is a symptomatic association. I don't think I disagree with you. I think I'm just pointing to a different aspect of that within it. And also, fuck Phil Fish. That guy sucks.
Yeah, dude sucks.
So much. But I was going to say something then, and it's completely popped out of my head. And it felt like a good point as well. It'll come to me. This is great podcasting. I think this is just epic. It's I think that's the difficulty, right? Because then, and this is something that's highlighted really well in the video that we're referring back to. It doesn't cut both ways, because Western RPGs, that connotation didn't apply in the same way as Japanese RPGs did. It was more encompassing. There was more nuance there. And so that, I think, then leads back into the, for want of a better term, problematic nature of JRPG as it was used in that way.
Yeah, because Western
Um,
RPG, you never hear that unless JRPG is mentioned, right? Like, it's not like we're
Yeah.
like, oh, Western RPGs. We're like, no, RPGs, and then it's like JRPGs. Oh yeah, Western RPG. You know what I mean? Like, it's like a term solely
Yeah.
born out of comparison, right? Yeah.
I've remembered what I was going to say, and that was back on the terminology side of things. I think this is something that gaming as a medium struggles with and will continue to struggle with for a time, just because there is so much variance and there is so much variance to come. You compared to another medium, books had it pretty nailed down, other than, flashbacks, flash forward. You're on a timeline, you have words on a page, that's it. Movies, once you've got color and sound, like leaving aside little Avatar 3D sort of experiments, that medium was kind of set. Gaming, there's just so much untapped potential, particularly with VR coming as well. There's so many different modes of interaction. Terminology that starts is inevitably going to get left behind by things that come after it.
Yeah.
And so I think that is a core problem. We've talked about Metroidvanias in the past. I think that's a very similar thing. That's a term coined by games in the late 90s, still applied to games, in the mid 20s, that might share some elements, but actually have so many differentiating things about them, might include so many other elements. I mean, just to quote a recent example at the time of recording, there's a game coming out now called Romancevania, which is Castlevania meets dating sim. And on a technical level, that might be a Metroidvania or share some Metroidvania elements. But also by necessity of the fact that it's morphing this other thing into it, it just absolutely doesn't. And the way that progressions are going to be gated and moved, your ability to backtrack in that is going to be impacted. So it doesn't necessarily fit in the same way. And, on the flip side of the term JRPG, an example that you've highlighted and an example that was highlighted in the videos, Chained Echoes came out very recently. In terms of what people consider to be a JRPG, which is an RPG in the classic 90s mold, normally turn-based combat, normally pixel art, but not necessarily both of those, a somewhat Saturday morning cartoon RPG sort of plot line, a degree of sort of kids saving the world with the power of friendship, has all those hallmarks, was made by a solo, I want to say, German developer.
I think so.
But if you didn't know the provenance of the game, you would say JRPG. And I think that then comes back to what I say about the term not necessarily being the problem so much as being a symptom. And it one of the many wrinkles that makes this particular situation so interesting. I also think, and this is probably something that we'll come back to later as we talk about it, and it's something that Skill Up highlights in the video where this story was first sort of generated from. It was his interaction with the producer that this is based on. I think it speaks to the interesting direction that RPGs coming out of Japan, particularly some of the big ones, particularly some of the ones made by Square Enix, it speaks to the direction that they've moved in terms of more action-focused combat, in terms of bigger spectacle. And maybe to pull that back a bit, I think it is fair to say that while I wouldn't say those games sucked in the period of time that this all started, there were elements in which developers, in the East were lagging behind in terms of understanding 3D tech, maybe not adopting it as quickly. And there was a window of time in which there was then a disparity. And I wouldn't necessarily say a negative disparity, but there were key differences in the way that those games were being put together and produced and the way that some of that was happening. Again, another really interesting wrinkle as I see the situation. I've rambled. Paula, what do you think about the whole thing?
My turn to ramble then. So I'm trying to gather all my thoughts into this because on one hand, JRPG is kind of like a stupid term in the sense of it technically just says it is an RPG made in Japan. So Final Fantasy VII is a JRPG, the remake, but also the Cruel King and the Great Hero is a JRPG, and they look nothing alike. Like Final Fantasy VII Remake is leaning more into an action RPG kind of thing. The aesthetic is completely different, and that is not being started on the kind of stories trying to tell. So in that sense, the term I think is very outdated in the sense of maybe, and not even like back in the day. Like back in the day, you still have the action RPG, the turn-based RPG, the strategy RPG, and also the more like in between kind of RPG, or like, and then you have developers coming up with something weirder that is Chrono Trigger, which combat you can turn into traditional RPG, traditional turn-based RPG, sorry, but it is not quite there if you follow like the way it's meant to be played. It's kind of weird. So in that sense, the term hasn't made sense ever. And even though back in the day, maybe it was a sign, like people use it like more as a sign of, hey, this game isn't up with the times. Nowadays, I think there's like another kind of derogatory like thing in the term that is like people think immediately of anime aesthetics and stuff like that. And a lot of the time, that kind of aesthetic that kind of like pushes people away from the medium because either because of the stigma anime tends to have, like being too fan servicey, or like people not understanding that it is a medium, not a genre. And kind of like the whole thing animation has gone through, like even in here in the West, like, hey, animation is for kids, or like animation is this or that, or such and such people watch animation. So in that sense,
To be fair,
I kind of,
I
to
mean,
be fair,
here's my thing. I'm not as worried about that because again, you're talking about aesthetic things, right? Where it's like
yeah.
seeing that aesthetic, but like I don't think we can. I think that's another conversation as well, right? Like aesthetic connotation, right? Like when you see a certain aesthetic that's created and you have a connotation with it, is
Mhm.
certainly something. But like, I also don't think there is as strong of like an idea. Like some people say anime games, right? But I don't think there's a strong terminology for that yet, right? Like, oh, you're talking about a game that is like based off of an anime, right? Like, or are you talking about game? You know what I mean? Like, it's like I don't know if that's necessarily as much of a category, but I think we can also say
True.
anime games are kind of like movie-based games where, listen, is it unfair that like tie-in games and stuff have that label? No, there might be some good ones. There's a
No.
lot of shit, right? And like that, to be fair, is just part of it. But like, I also don't think it's derogatory necessarily, right? Because in that sense, I actually think that's more accurate of a terminology, right? To call something an
I mean, it is.
anime-based game, it's like, well, yeah, that is the style it's creating, right? And if you don't like parts of it, I'm actually okay with that, right? It's like it's fine if you dislike elements of anime, but it almost feels more accurate because it's like, oh, now we're hitting on the artistic style and potentially some of what's going. Do you know what I mean? Like I just think I think it's less. At
Mhm.
least personally, I would see that as less of an issue than saying a Japanese RPG, because that to me, like the Japanese element, it's like, what are you hitting at? Like cultural ideas, maybe. But Japan's huge, right? I understand anime is also very varied, right? So it's not a great one, but I also think that's part of why it's not actually used as a category. But anyway, does that make sense a little what I'm trying to say there?
Yeah, mainly it. I think I was trying to hit into something different in the sense of,
Mm.
hey, the sense of, hey, JRPGs are being assimilated with all these other concepts
Mm.
in general.
I see.
Again, you have games that maybe you wouldn't expect them to be JRPGs, but they are made in Japan. And then you have the other side of the spectrum of Chinegos. But also, this is something more interesting, that maybe like there's a stigma on the game itself, like, hey, it is from Japan, but in which sense you're saying it is a Japanese RPG? But also there's a thing of which public plays the Japanese RPG. Mainly, it is not as prevalent here in this community as it is in the otome game community, where we get stigmatized because we play otome games. As in, all otome gamers are probably singles, or like They just look at the games for horny people and stuff like that. And there's such more, and the games are like so much more nuanced than that. And again, I don't think Japanese RPGs get, or like Japanese RPG players get as much, I guess, ugly looks from most people as otome gamers do, or gallery gamers do, or like visual novel gamers in general do. But still, I think there's something that like, you're not only like using it like now knowing that it is seen as a derogatory term by the people who create these games, I would try to avoid to use it because the game is shit anyway. Like the term is shit anyway. Sorry, the games are fantastic. The term is shit anyway.
Well, some of them are bad. I mean, not all games are great.
Not all games are great, but the term doesn't tell you anything. Like two vastly different games are under the same umbrella, and that is like why. So in that sense, it's like okay, the term doesn't mean much in a sense, and also a group says, "Hey, it is derogatory." So I say, "Hey, better. Why don't we just call the JRPGs RPGs, and we start like calling them action RPGs, turn-based RPGs, strategy RPGs, regardless of where they came from, or like regardless of the overall aesthetic of it, or regardless of what tropes they have."
And it's
So
worth saying, I think some of the why did that come into prevalence is probably because it did matter for a certain window of time when localization wasn't always guaranteed,
yeah,
when the internet wasn't as much of a thing, when it was relevant to what you were expecting from that game, when the idiosyncrasies of sort of Asian culture versus Western culture mattered to people making a purchasing decision. I think that's much less of a factor these days, in a good way, and for a variety of different reasons. But that's what becomes tricky with terminology, right? Because it has to fall out of use. And to an extent, the term JRPG still has some utility for a lot of people. Not necessarily as a negative thing, but in what we highlighted in terms of RPGs leaning towards what the 90s classics did. I expect that changes on its own with time as we find better ways to describe that specifically. And also as the RPGs coming out of Japan changed, like you mentioned, things like FF7 Remake. It's a Japanese RPG in terms of where it came from, but it doesn't really tick any of the other boxes. And that's one where... Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, it's also becoming more challenging because you could reasonably argue that games in the 90s, like you mentioned, and even before, and even maybe in the 2000s, the aughts and whatnot, were genuinely all made in Japan, right? But nowadays, teams are so global. It's like, yeah, I guess the creative team and like the head team is probably in Japan, but for fuck's sakes, they've got people working on it in the US and Canada and like all over the place, right? And like also Korea and China are becoming big game developers now too, right? Like they're starting to really hit up, and so like it's starting to become like you mentioned, there are just games, and we've already hit on this, that are just made in other countries, right? Where it's no longer like this kind of useful thing. I do think it's interesting as well, because I guess part of the question now too, it's like as the world's becoming more globalized, and as you've mentioned, genres are shifting and melding. It is still fascinating that when you say JRPG, you still have a really clear image in your head. At least I do, and it might be different to what others do. But like part of what I feel like, it's this like, and I really liked what Stephanie Sterling brought up about the idea that it's like, okay, it's not really role-playing games, right? Like you're not really like you're not really making your own role. You're like playing a character, right? Like even in Fire Emblem, you are a character. You don't have much choice. You're this person. And in all the Final Fantasy games, you're a person. You're like that one. Like that's who you are. You're this dude. Maybe you can change their name, but you are this person. And so like to me, it feels a lot like they're like character-based RPGs, like character-based, turn-based, party-based RPGs. Like that's like their big main things. It's like you're a character, you're gonna have turn-based combat, you're gonna have a party with you, and like that to me is like the essence of JRPGs at least. And then obviously they deviate, right? Like the new Final Fantasy remake is no longer in that area, right? Like to me, that is full on action RPG world. You don't even manage a party really. You've got a party. You don't really do much with them, you know? Like they kind of do their own thing.
And I'm an interesting one for me is what do we use to replace it? Because a lot of the words that you mentioned that I think would come close to encapsulating it in a single RPG prefix are C, which already exists. Classic RPGs in the Wasteland mold. I think I don't know what a good one is. I think I
Well-
need to think more about what a good one would be.
I also think that ultimately, there's it's too challenging to just come up with a term, right? Like and most of the time that's not how these terms come up, right? Like it's just something
Right.
gets mentioned and then people like glom onto it and they figure it out and they stick with it, right? But it might even be a thing that isn't even needed anymore, like you've mentioned. It's like there aren't that many things that fall into that classic mold being created anymore, right? Like it's just not a thing as much, you know what I mean? Like there's just not as many coming out.
I still think you need some kind of umbrella term.
Mhm.
I think that's still useful, and I think because it's useful, it will be something that ends up being settled upon. What that one happens to be, I don't know, but
Yeah, I know.
I
I'll
certainly think that's the thing that happens.
probably refer to them as like, because I actually like the idea of like 90s styled RPGs. Because like to me, that's really what it like. Whenever I think of them, I'm like, that's what I think of. It's like the 80s, 90s RPGs. But yeah, even that's not perfect. But none of these are perfect, right? Like roguelikes, roguelike, those things, they're terrible. They don't really work function. They tried the Berlin interpretation, right? Where they tried to figure out what how to define it, and then it ended up just becoming this huge catch-all. But I don't know. I think there's I actually think also that we're getting to a period in time where we can start referring to these games by referring to other games. You know what I mean? Like the Metroidvania aspect. Like I would love to have Final Cross likes or something, you know? It's just like
Final Trigger, yeah.
yeah, right. Where it's like FFRPGs, where it's just like Final Fantasy styled RPGs. You know, it's like that. Talk about that's an umbrella right there, because like really, that's what we're thinking of. Dragon Quest likes, you know what I mean? Like anyway, stuff like that, right?
But that becomes tricky in a month because FF16 is basically Devil May Cry.
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, that's why Dragon Quest is better because Dragon Quest has never changed.
No.
Right? It really hasn't.
DQ RPGs, maybe that's the one.
RPGs. That's good. It's like Dairy Queen RPGs, but there you go. DQ RPGs.
Full fat.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I think something like that can work, you know? Like I think we've gotten to the point now where we can literally just because like Metroidvanias, we get it. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, I get what that is. And like I think we've gotten to the point where it's like you can start just hammering in hammering like other titles into things and it just works, you know what I mean? We just figure out what that is. Yeah, because I don't know, would you call Yax Like a Dragon a JRPG, right? Like it follows in that world, but it's like actually that might be the only time. Yeah, I was gonna say, but well, an ARPG. Oh, it's definitely not action. It's very turn based.
Oh no, of course, Like a Dragon is. Yeah,
sorry.
I think that probably would work as.
I was gonna say
I think that's what we're about to say.
That's the only game that could be called a Japanese RPG because that's exactly what it is. It's like like that's like the only time where I'm like, no, that is not derogatory because that is literally a Japanese role playing game where you role play being Japanese. Like that is like that's it. Obviously, very heightened concept. Anyway, I just thought this would be kind of an interesting thing to talk about a little bit because it was a new concept for me. Like no one had ever like brought up the kind of derogatory nature of this before, and it kind of hit me a little bit. And I hope people listening, if you were feeling a bit defensive about this, maybe just take a breath, right? Take a step back, and just think a little bit like, why do you feel that way? Because again, it got a little bit heated in the How Long to Beat forums. I will say, if you want to go in there, there's definitely a little bit of, I guess what you could say, this sort of right versus left debate that's going on. There's a bit of this like people are trying to say that it's like anyway. We're not going to get into that because let me put it this way, folks. when people ask you not to say something, just be nice. It's not gonna hurt you. It's okay. It's a word. It's fine to just listen when folks feel uncomfortable about something. It's just being nice. Yeah. Any final thoughts?
I think I would love to hear from our lovely listeners as to what they think in the comments just below the like button.
Tell us what the new category
Well,
should be.
And well added, leave a comment, click on that subscription button, and ring the notification bell.
There you go. We're officially YouTubers. Okay. That is it. It's time for How Long to Beat the Game. Rick, I think it's your turn to.
It certainly is, and I totally came prepared with this week's game, which is a game known by many names of different languages based on the country in which they were released. One of those names is a name which you would pronounce Mega Man 02 for the Game Boy Advance.
Mega Man Zero game.
So, as always with this game, there are 5 points up for grabs between Paula and Alex. 1 point each for getting closest to the main plus and 100% times, which they will be sending me in secret. And there are also 2 additional bonus points for a unique category picked by me for this specific game, this specific time. And this time, that is going to be, I would like to know, to the nearest percentage point, just to avoid the confusion we had last week, what percentage of people who played this game you think retired it?
Okay, I think I'm pretty good on this because I actually played a Zero game not that long ago.
I need to go back and play them. I've got the DS collection possibly still in its shrink wrap.
How good have they been about re-releasing these games? Like, it's gold standard.
Well, the collection's at the time of recording, it's half price on Switch for the Z and ZX collection. Now, I played ZX and ZX Advent on DS. They were good, but I wouldn't say they were great.
Yeah.
I've heard much better things about the Zero games, so I am looking forward to at some point going around to those.
I still have to beat all the Mega Man X games, so I'm like, I got a lot of Mega Man to play in my life. Though I'm very excited for the Battle Network collections that are coming. Someday I'll get those on a discount.
Oh man, I do not have the time to commit to Battle Network games.
I know.
It's just not a thing.
They're so long. They're so good. Like, I played some of the first Battle Network. It's so much fun. Okay, I got to figure out the retirements here.
I was going to say that's the only thing I'm waiting on from you, Alex. Everything else we've. You
just said, has Paula submitted everything?
Paula's given me everything.
Okay. Then
if there was a point for punctuality, Paula would have it.
Let me just think. The percentage of retirement. Okay.
Mm.
Okay. Well. Let's do this. This is cheeky. There we go. I did it. I'm not very confident on this one. I feel like I always undershot or way overshot the retirements. So.
Well, I told you to the nearest percentage point, Alex, so I would ask you just to correct that.
Oh, the nearest percentage point? But don't they do them in different random percentage points?
I'm asking for the nearest percentage point.
Okay, so wait. What do you mean by the nearest? Like,
I mean a single point, so 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%, 5%.
Oh, that's what you mean.
Don't do a 1.2.
So no decimal places.
But doesn't that mean it's more likely that we'll get it wrong?
It's whoever's closest.
Okay. Okay, well then I'm going to change it. Then I'm going to do... I'll do that one then.
Interesting. Okay. So, let's go for the time. So, for main time, you both get a point because you've both said 3 hours, which is also bang on for the time.
I had a feeling these are short games.
They certainly are. For main plus, Alex has put 5 hours. Paula has put 7 hours. It's 5 hours, so Alex gets point number 2.
Yeah.
Damn it.
However, point number 3 goes to Paula, who has said correctly 11 hours versus Alex 10 hours, 30 minutes. Those half hours, they're not good for you.
Dang it. I shouldn't have done that.
We're currently looking at 2 points each with a bonus category to go. So, for the percentage of players retiring this game, We have wild variance here. Alex
Really?
has said 2%. Paula has said 12%.
Holy shit! No way! No.
And the correct answer is 0.4 with a 1 before. It's 1.4%. So Alex gets 2 additional points.
I made that mistake a long time ago. The percentages are, I feel like the highest I've ever seen is like 9 or 10. Well, I guess there are.
I do think a lot of people just stop playing and don't necessarily retire or just delete it off. It is for sure a thing.
Yeah. Nice.
Anyway.
Okay. That was a close round then. It just put me within striking distance basically, because now Paula has 11, I have 10, Rick has 6, but obviously Rick, this is your round, so.
And we've got one more between yourself and myself before we end the game week, I believe.
That's true. Yeah, we do. Yes.
So there is every chance that we might be able to loop this back around.
You could tie Paula, or if I get 1 point,
or you
I
could
tie
take
Paula.
the win.
Or
yeah.
I could, yeah, I'd have to do pretty darn well though.
You only need a couple of points.
True. Yeah, but.
We'll see you next week, so you best not miss it. Until then, stay safe.
Toodaloo.